First off, I want to thank the grace of heaven and the virtues of the masters, the mercy of the grand predecessors, transmitting masters, and everyone here today for this opportunity to talk about our divine matriarch. Okay, so actually this week, Wednesday was her birthday. Okay, so it's the lunar. Oh, okay, well, I'll get to that. Let's see here. Yeah. Okay, so our divine matriarch, or sometimes you might say holy matriarch, or sometimes you say 18th matriarch because it's 18th, but born in Shandong province in 1895. Let's see. Okay. Now, let's see. Her surname is Sun. Okay, Sun Su Zhen. Okay. She received that in 1918. And let's see, in 1930, she received heaven's mandate, along with the 18th patriarch. Okay, our holy teacher, Sizun. Okay, so, matriarch, in Chinese, we call her Simu, literally meaning teacher, mother. Okay, so, but anyways, they both received heaven's mandate at the same time, 1930. Okay. And then when 18th patriarch, unfortunately he had kind of passed or returned back to heaven, kind of early, 1947. And that's the Mid-Autumn Festival, 8/15. So actually, this 8/8. That's right, 8/8/15. Okay, so that's coming up. Oh, wait, that's not right. Okay, yeah, I guess there's a later. I don't know. Okay, they may have gotten the dates confused here, but okay. But anyways, yeah, it is Mid-Autumn Festival. Okay, so that left our matriarch, divine matriarch, to kind of carry on this mission of universal salvation, by herself as the sole surviving, the matriarch. Okay. So, because of the communist, the communists in China, they were taking over. In fact, by they took over completely by 1949. So, so she had left for Hong Kong in 1949, but because she, she worried about her disciples still in China. So in 1950, she actually returned to China. Because of the continuous persecution by the communists there, the Tao elders who were there pleaded with matriarch to leave mainland. Okay, so finally she made her way to Taiwan via, Macau and Hong Kong, and she arrived in Taiwan in 1954, and lived in the central part of Taiwan. That's Taichung. Okay, during matriarch's stay in Taiwan, she endured self-confinement to mitigate the trials and tribulations of the Tao community. She, suffered from many illnesses as well. And also she suffered a stroke later in her later years. Having dedicated all her life to Tao, matriarch passed away in 1975. She was 81. And then Lao Mu, God, bestowed her the title of, in Chinese it's Zhonghua Semu, which literally you can say is like Holy Mother or Divine, Holy Mother of China is the literal thing. Okay. And then she is buried in Daxi Township in Taoyuan in Taiwan. Okay. All right. And then she's also, she is the incarnation of Yehui Bodhisattva. Yehui literally means moon and wisdom. Okay. So, But so this Bodhisattva, so, you know, all these patriarchs are basically, you know, they're, just like our, Suzun, patriarch is the incarnation of, Jigong, living Buddha. So they're all either bodhisattvas or Buddhas. Okay. So, you know, this bunch of stories basically, about the matriarch. These are actually, I'm not sure who, someone had written either a book or as an article or something, about, this is probably some extracts from a book, I think. But I don't know who the author is, because I don't have that information here, but, and so, you know, this person's writing, about her. And then so this first story, says Matriarch gives you 720. Okay. So, it's before the end of the Japanese occupation in China. 18th Patriarch and Matriarch's propagation of Tao can be said to be one of toil and overcoming obstacles. Okay, so I'm kind of basically reading or giving you this is how this author who wrote it's his words mostly. Okay, so they traveled around the country all day long. Patriarch and Matriarch personally presided over the Tao affairs of the 36 provinces and ordained all the transmitters. I don't know. I used the word ordain. I don't know if we have a different one, but that's, I think people are more familiar with that. So I use ordain. But, after the end of the Japanese occupation, on one hand, Tao was propagated all over the country. But on the other hand, the long and arduous journeys took its toll on Patriarch's health. Right, so gradually the Tao elders were given the responsibility of ordaining transmitters. So to basically, okay, so obviously, you know, we're talking about the patriarch and matriarch. They have a mandate to be the patriarch and matriarch. But then they also, and then transmitting masters also have a mandate to be able to transmit the Tao, okay, to three treasures. But where did they get their mandate from? So back then they got it from the patriarch and matriarch. Okay, so they could say, you know, I don't know if there's a better word than ordain, but, you know, they select, the transmitters and they give them this transmitter mandate to transmit the Tao. Okay. So not everyone can transmit the Tao. It's only the transmitters who have been, you know, selected by the patriarch, matriarch. So obviously the patriarch then gave kind of the authority to some of the Tao elders to also, have this responsibility of also, ordaining these transmitters as well. Okay. So there was this one Tao elder called Sun Shi Kun. Okay. Sun Shi Kun. Okay, so he was highly respected at the time and was highly regarded by patriarch and matriarch. So once, when patriarch was propagating Tao in Chengdu, in Sichuan province, he called to Tao elder Sun. Okay, so holy teacher will give you an allocation of 360 of heaven's mandates for you to ordain the transmitters. Okay, so this is not, you know, this is not the patriarch mandate. It's for the transmitting mandates. Okay, but I mean, well, basically the Tao elder, he could ordain transmitters. So go propagate Tao and ferry people with affinity, excuse me, along the Yangtze River. Now, matriarch had felt kind of bad for Tao elder Sun because he had to endure a lot of countless trials, or, you know, in the past, but she knew that he was a kind of a rare person who would not fail. Okay, so therefore, you know, she had confidence in him. So then she also said, you know, holy teacher gives you 360 mandates, but, you know, matriarch will give you another 720 mandates. Okay, so go forth and do your best to propagate Tao, right? So basically you got a total of, you know, 360 plus 720. So that's like 1120, I guess. But more than 1,000 of these mandates. So in other words, when he goes out, he can ordain, that many transmitters. Okay, so you can't go beyond that because he wasn't authorized by the patriarch or matriarch to give more. But okay, so this event was witnessed by a predecessor who was currently in the U.S. Well, at the time of this writing, anyways, I think maybe this person wrote this. I think in the 80s, 1980s. Okay, so there's this predecessor who followed the patriarch since childhood. The story can refute the erroneous claim by there's one group, the Tao group under. Okay, so it gets a little bit kind of complicated, but not. Okay, so first of all, actually, back then, patriarch and matriarch, because they were kind of traveling together and out propagating Tao together, they had to appear like they were husband and wife, even though they were not. I mean, the patriarch, he had his own, he had his family, he had a wife and children, but the matriarch was unmarried. And so at the time, I can imagine this is, 1930s, the society was a little bit different. The tradition is more traditional and things like that. And so, a man could not be with, especially a married man, could not be with an unmarried woman, okay, or a woman who is not his wife. So, but in order to make this happen, to make, so that they can propagate Tao, so they were kind of married in name only, okay, the patriarch and matriarch, okay, so that they can go out and propagate Tao. So it's got a little bit complicated, but anyways, the other issue, which we talked about also earlier when we were talking about, in the Maitreya Disaster Rescue Sutra, the things about the matriarch getting the mandate. There were those who did not believe that she could have the mandate because it was the first time that a woman becomes a patriarch or a matriarch. Okay, so but here what we're referring to is later on after Suzun, or patriarch, passed, there were followers of patriarch who, basically they did not believe that matriarch had a mandate. And so to today, I mean, that group still exists. Okay. So, I don't know how to say it in English, but it's the Sishong group. I mean, but, and they follow basically they follow, the patriarch Sijun's son. Okay. And then obviously now, the son is I don't think he's alive now, but, they were following under him. Okay. So, but they don't really follow the matriarch at all. But okay. So this is referring to that. Now, okay. So, let's see. All right. So now, so they don't believe that she has the mandate. Now, imagine if matriarch did not have the mandate, then how could she dare to give Tao Elder Sun 720 transmitter mandates in front of the holy teacher, or, in front of the patriarch, right? So obviously the patriarch did not, well, at least as far as what we know here, that the patriarch, didn't say anything that she didn't have the mandate. So obviously she had a mandate to be able to give that. And so after, Sun Tao Elder came to Taiwan, right, he founded a Justice Support Society, and, that other group, the seniors in that other group, they respected him as the Tao Elder. And, Tao Elder Sun, then, he has since returned to heaven. Now, if he had left any of these transmitter mandates, remember he had like over 1,000, before, He went to Taiwan. So I don't know if he had any left. If he had any left and he passed that on to that other group, then, because Matriarch, the mandate that she gave 2/3 of them. Okay. So basically, if there were any left that they used, then that basically they probably have used some of the mandates that came from Matriarch. And so to claim that she does not have the mandate, that kind of becomes kind of foolish or hypocritical. I mean, to say that. Okay. So anyways, that's just something that, I know for new people, for, the new Daokin, you don't know any of this history, but anyways, yeah, this is something that for us who've been in the Dao a lot, longer, that we, there's some things that go on like this. Okay. All right. Okay. So next story, sewing clothes for disciples. Okay. So, night fell in early winter. And the moonlight quietly shone into the window. The cries of insects, one after another, echoed far away. In this quiet and sweet night, a pair of warm hands are sewing clothes under the lamp, stitch by stitch, full of love. Okay, so Matriarch was sewing a robe for the holy medium who was with the Patriarch. Since the holy medium is, back then they were usually, I don't know if they had how old they were, but they were male. Okay, today the holy mediums that we use are female. Okay, but back then they were male. But this holy medium had followed the Patriarch since he was a child. Right, the Patriarch treated him like his own son, propagating Tao together during the day and sharing the sleeping quarters at night. Matriarch also treated him with warmth and care, never being disrespectful just because she happened to be, heaven-mandated Matriarch. On the contrary, she is kind and humble. In her spare time, she often sews the clothes for the disciples. Okay. So thinking that, this robe can bring a little warmth to the disciple in the severe cold of winter, the kind face of the Matriarch showed a bodhisattva's selfless love. All sentient beings are like her children. Okay. In the suffering world, she is willing to do her best to bring some light and warmth to sentient beings. So today, the predecessors who are more than 80 years old, actually, this was back in mid-80s or late 1980s. Today, we are this Fa-yi. Okay, so we're under this Fa-yi group lineage that there are no more. We have no more predecessors. Okay, that are living. But so back then it says, they still treasured the robe that was sewn by the Matriarch. Through the passage of time, this robe has long since become, obsolete, but it contains the undying love and hard work, of the Matriarch. Okay. So that's just another little story. Okay. Here's another story. It says go southeast. Okay. So, in 1941 or so, grand predecessor Han. Okay. So grand predecessor, right? So we have predecessors and then we have grand predecessor who's kind of like the leader of the predecessors. And then there's also above him is like the Dao elder that we talked about earlier. And then, so that the Dao elder would be the highest, position, if you will, the rank or whatever, below the matriarch. Okay. All right. So the grand predecessor, he's the one, for this grand predecessor, Han, is, basically of our Fa-yi group. Okay. So he was ready to lead 22 predecessors to pioneer Tao in Xi'an, that's in the west of China. However, and then of course, before they do that, they need to report to, the patriarch and matriarch. Well, at that time, either patriarch or matriarch, this is part of you can say the proprieties within the temple or within the Tao that we have to observe. If we're going to go out, we got to report, and then make sure that, we are allowed to do it. Okay, so in this case, the matriarch told them, don't go northwest, or yeah, I guess that's kind of northwest, but go pioneer Tao, excuse me, in the southeast. Okay. There are many kind-hearted people waiting for you to ferry there. Okay. So, and then they said, well, the southeast, isn't that the desert island of Taiwan? So they were kind of all shocked in hearing this. At the time, Taiwan, for some reason, it gave people the impression of being a wild and uncontrolled island under Japanese rule, which it was under Japanese rule at the time. People in Taiwan spoke either Japanese or this Minnan dialect, but they were all, but these, predecessors, they were all authentic northerners from China, okay? So none of them could speak the Minnan dialect. Moreover, they were supposed to leave the land. They shared so much sorrow and joy together to cross the ocean and pioneer Tao in a foreign land. So their reluctant attachment to the motherland and strange fear of Taiwan made them very hesitant. But Matriarch said more firmly, if you go southeast, you will have to endure 10 years of hardships. But as long as you have the will to survive these 10 years, Tao affairs will flourish afterwards. Right? If you still have not achieved this after 10 years, then you can come back and look for me and prove that Matriarch's mandate is not valid, right? So if what she said is not true, then, then we can say that, then she's saying that, then, she doesn't have the true mandate. But it turns out, of course, history has shown that, she has the mandate, because what she said was true. Okay, so with these words from the matriarch, grand predecessor Han led 16 predecessors to set off and cross the sea to Taiwan, one after the other. Okay. Although the future was as vast as the sea and unknown to them, they still marched bravely, crossing the strait and raging waves to arrive at the wilderness that was Taiwan, and began to pioneer and plant the seeds of Tao. Sure enough, as Matriarch had foretold, the predecessors were simply unable to do much of anything when they were there, in Taiwan. There was a language barrier. Everything was, the whole environment was unfamiliar, and coupled with the fall of the mainland to the communists, right, there was a complete severance of financial support from, from China. So that made it even more difficult. Whenever they made some headway, they faced other trials. And we'll talk, there's other stories later on about some of the trials that happening. But yeah, another thing was that they suffered a lot of financial, you can say financial calamity or whatever. I mean, the money that they brought with them from China became useless because in Taiwan they revalued the currency, and it was, I think it was like what used to be like $10,000 became $1. So you can imagine what they brought became worthless, and so they had to struggle to really just to survive. And then not only that, they have to support the temple and the Tao activity as well. So you can imagine the situation is pretty dire for them. Okay, so having steadfast faith in the matriarch, no matter how rugged the road was, no matter how many difficulties and obstacles they encountered, they still worked hard. Okay, finally, they discovered that Taiwan is indeed a fertile rice paddy, a beautiful treasure island with a good harvest. Yeah, of course, they're talking about being able to ferry a lot of people in Taiwan. Okay. Looking back on the history of the past 40 years, we have to admire Matriarch's prophecy. All right, before the fall of the mainland, she forced the disciples to leave the mainland one by one and sent them to Taiwan, Southeast Asia, the United States, and other places, where each land was pioneered and the seeds of Tao were planted. Who does not love their own country's land? How piercing is the pain of leaving behind a home. However, if it were not for the wisdom of the matriarch, how can the Tao lineage spread across the 5 continents, or, across the whole world now? How can it flourish in Taiwan? How can the Chinese in Taiwan and the Chinese overseas receive the Tao blessing? So, again, it's like that, the critical, thing that Matriarch told them to go southeast, instead of where they wanted to go. That you can say kind of changed the course of Tao history, I guess. I mean, because with the communists taking over China, obviously there was a lot of oppression and persecution of the people cultivating in the Tao. So, if the Tao had stayed within China, obviously we wouldn't be here today talking, in class here. Okay. So, because we would not have received the Tao, right? So, all right. So it's definitely a big turning point, I guess, or yeah. Okay. Now, on the other hand, the mainland, just across the strait, the Iguan Tao, it's been banned as they consider it as a active counter-revolutionary force for 40 years. Okay. So actually, I think, well, yeah, today they don't refer, I think they consider it still as a cult though. Okay. So it's still banned, officially in China. But so if it wasn't for the foresight of the matriarch, the Tao lineage would have come to an end under the destruction of communism. Yeah. Okay. So, now the news on the other side of the strait is that the virtuous worthies have been, tortured for decades in the labor camps, and they were also forced sometimes to break their vegetarian vow, forced to eat meat, for example. And also there were countless deaths of, essentially young martyrs. I mean, there were many, some who were they were shot, killed. A lot of them were imprisoned. Okay. So how did Matriarch bear this kind of heart-wrenching pain? No wonder Matriarch cries and sheds tears all day long. The Bodhisattva and all sentient beings are of one body. Let alone the feeling of master and disciple is like a parent and child. Okay, so that is kind of like the relationship that the matriarch and also patriarch has with all their followers and disciples. It's really like the parent and child relationship. But that is like what a Buddha, a Bodhisattva treats all sentient beings as part of themselves. They're one. So it's like as one body. So when sentient beings are suffering, they are suffering. Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right. So the next. Okay. So this next story, it's called The Rest of Her Life. Okay. So, now the person who wrote this, now he mentions there was this Taiwanese artist in New York. This is back in maybe late 70s, where he kind of built I want to say a prison, like a little personal individual prison in Soho, New York City. Okay. So, and then basically he sealed himself confined himself, basically imprisoned himself in that prison that he built. So, and isolated, basically secluded from the world. And he kind of lived in there for like a year. But anyways, he kind of mentioned this to, because he had heard about this, news, but, then he realized that there's, someone else that that someone else did this before. Okay. So, basically he had learned that there's a person in Taiwan who was not only imprisoned for a year, but for more than 20 years. Okay. So she silently endured this loneliness, but few know about it. She is the beloved matriarch of the White Era disciples. Okay. So Yerhui Bodhisattva. Okay. So she's kind of, thinking back, right? It was more than 30 years ago. So this is, okay. So at the time, right, the number of followers of Yiquan Dao, right? That's that's the name of this, our practice. They gradually increased. Not only did they attract attention from all parties, but they were also squeezed out by various religions. All kinds of false reports caused an oppression and ban of Dao preaching and assembly. At that time, Matriarch had recently arrived in Taiwan. Okay, so after asking asking the predecessors from various districts, she learned of the great difficulties of Yiquan Dao preaching in Taiwan, and it made her heart ache. She came to the world to save the suffering of sentient beings and to ferry the sentient beings from the cycle of life and of birth and death. Okay, all the Yiquan Dao practitioners are her beloved disciples. Right? Her compassionate heart could not bear to witness their suffering, let alone to see the Dao society built through countless difficulties destroyed one by one. So she sadly said, since they want to shut us down, why not just shut me down instead? Don't shut down my followers. Since they want to torture, just torture me. Don't torture my disciples. Okay, so this is obviously, that's, she is willing to take on, it's just like as a parent would protect their child, right? Would take the punishment for the child. The same thing here, with the matriarch. Since then, matriarch lived in seclusion in central Taiwan, staying at home all year round, locked up in a prison built with compassion. However, matriarch's healthy body had begun to suffer from various pains and gradually wear down. Nevertheless, after matriarch said those words, all the hardships of the trials were resolved invisibly, and Dao affairs could be conducted again. These trials and tribulations were shouldered by the matriarch alone. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, it says, the Bodhisattva enters the sea, birth and death for the sake of pitiful sentient beings, flowing through the cycle of birth and death, to manifest the suffering of illness and death, and birth and death. If the illness of sentient beings is cured, then the illness of the Bodhisattva will naturally be healed. The cause of the Bodhisattva's illness, it comes from great compassion. It's like an elderly person. If the child gets sick, the parents get sick together. Only when the child is healed can the parents be healed. Okay. So the matriarch is one such Bodhisattva who enters birth and death for the sake of all beings. In order to extend the lineage and mandate of Tao, she is willing to imprison herself in order to free the disciples from suffering. She would rather bear the enormous suffering of all living beings day after day and year after year. The growth of the Tao society in exchange for matriarch's increasingly faltering steps, and the strength of the Tao society in exchange for her weakening body. Okay. There's some words from, actually this is, I think it's after, well, anyways, these are her, some of her words, which translated here. So basically it's those wishing that matriarch's kotos or her vows, lets the disciples carry out Tao affairs in peace. She wishes that matriarch's vows lets the disciples return to the heavenly ranks, be able to, basically cultivate and return back to heaven. Wishing that matriarch's tears lets disciples truly cultivate and propagate the Tao. Wishing matriarch's confinement can let lets the disciples overcome difficulties. Matriarch made the vows that she will bear disciples' hardships and endure disciples' sufferings. Right? Just hoping that every sincerely cultivating disciple is safe and propagates Tao well. So, very selfless, right? Wanting the best for her disciples. Oh, okay. Okay, so let's see. All right, so back to what the person was writing here. It says, I wonder what kind of prison in which Matriarch was locked up. There are no barriers, no locks, no lawyer seals to witness, and no vows in front of the Buddha. It was just a merciful wish, a promise, and her life entered the boundless and long years of self-confinement. For more than 20 years, the illnesses continued until she returned to heaven. Right? Okay. Now, the matriarch does not even want to take credit. So some Daoqian generally think that matriarch was in seclusion because of her frailty and illness. If it was not for the virtuous worthies or predecessors who heard the matriarch's profound words, and for the confirmation later on, the matriarch may have silently endured the calamity without anyone knowing. Okay, so staring at the pictures of matriarch, there's always the boundless shame of low self-esteem. Her motherly eyes seem to shed endless tears for sentient beings. Her beautiful eyebrows cannot conceal her tough and determined temperament, and her closed lips exuding the burden of tolerance and humiliation belonging to women. How much extraordinary power is in that seemingly ordinary face? Can the seemingly weak body withstand the great hardships of sentient beings? Now, we who are sitting in the shadow of our matriarch and enjoying the life of cultivation, how can we understand the hardship of her confinement for more than 20 years? In the Avatamsaka Sutra, it says, when the Bodhisattva suffers like this, he becomes more diligent, does not give up or avoid, is not surprised, does not retreat, and is not timid, and does not tire of the duty. Okay, so why? It is his wish and determination to bear the burden of liberating all sentient beings. So this is a portrait of her life. Right? She has never demonstrated magical powers to win people's trust, but only wants to bear the calamities of all beings, hoping for the universal propagation of the great Tao and for the transcendence of all beings from cycle of birth and death. So more than 20 years of self-confinement has been exchanged for today's universal propagation of Tao and for the countless sentient beings who have returned to their true nature. If a grain of wheat does not fall to the ground and die, it is still one grain. If it dies, then it will bear many grains. So Matriarch's life is like a seed containing the vitality of heaven and earth. Although her life has been extinguished, the seeds she planted with her life have been exchanged for countless sprouts and new growth of life. Okay, so as part of her confinement, or during her confinement, self-confinement, this is probably the most well known about the matriarch is these 10,000 vows. Okay. So in around 1961 was when the Yiguandao trials and tribulations were at their peak, in Taiwan. Back then, let's say in the 50s, even in the 60s, Taiwan was under martial law because remember that they were the nationalists who kind of retreated from mainland China, because they were defeated by the communists. So but it was, it's kind of like a dictatorship run, there. It's not a democracy back then. And so they were suspicious of any kind of, people getting together, and especially if they're like, they have some secrets. Okay. So the Yiguan the Dao community, was under suspicion, and they kind of cracked down on it and banned a lot of the activities. So the ban swept across the Dao society like a chilling wind, and the Dao temples were shut down under the strict monitoring. Okay. The Dao temple is like the snow lotus in the mud. When people are not paying attention, it quietly blooms in every damp and dirty corner, blooming and bearing fruit. Not only ignores the filth of the 5 turbidities, but also purifies the world inch by inch. Well, these 5 turbidities, they're basically, the first is life. Basically, sentient beings commit evil karma, thus shortening their lives. Vexation. Sentient beings are full of the 3 poisons, okay, greed, anger, delusion, or ignorance. The timing, I guess, the era, the time that we're in, there's an age of nonstop hunger, disease, and war. Sentient beings, they still have the 3 poisons, and they do not believe in causality and karma, and do not practice the precepts. And the 5th is basically having corrupt views. Heretical views are running wild in place. Okay, so these are the what's known as the 5 turbidities in this world. Okay. So of course, it may be the shared evil karma of mankind. Right, the Dao temple was regarded as something strange and suspicious for no reason and was shut down. Many virtuous worthies halted the propagation and teaching for fear of bringing harm to the Dao kin. Okay, so Dao kin, sometimes we say Dao relative. It's basically Dao kin is, anyone, basically people who receive the Dao because, when we receive the Dao, we consider everyone's like brothers and sisters, right? So we're like family. So we're all kin. Okay, so those Dao kin who were not easy to ferry in the first place suddenly lost their support after closure of the temples, right? They couldn't go to the temple to further, to learn and practice, cultivate, right? So they fell into the quagmire of difficulties again. Although the virtuous worthies they felt distress, but they were helpless, right? So on this day, there was this one day that there was an official order was being issued to close a temple in central Taiwan, and it happened to be like the major temple that was there. This official order was, this is what the guy wrote. The person wrote. He says, was stunned by the heavens and actually got into the hands of an Yiguandao brother. Okay, so. Although he was just a low-level supervisor, he did not have the authority to block the order. And should the order be handed down, then it will be carried out, right? So he's staring at this official order, and he thought, wow, heaven's door is about to be closed again, right? So beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and the cold sweat on his palms got the document wet, okay? So all he could do was to report this to his predecessor, okay? The sea of suffering is boundless, and heavenly Tao's response to the needs of the times is so precious and rare. It is not easy for sentient beings to have a Dharma boat. That Dharma boat is basically when we say that we have a temple is like a Dharma boat, okay, that can ferry them to the other shore or the shore of enlightenment. Okay, so yet we watch the white-eared Dharma boats being shattered everywhere. The predecessors wore grave expressions and sighed deeply, especially since this temple can be said to be the hub of the central Tao community. Once closed, the central Tao community will soon face a crisis of suspension. Not only will it not be able to continue to propagate Tao and ferry people, but also how many Tao kin will be displaced as a result, returning to wandering in the mundane life. Although the predecessors were worried, they agreed, or at least they initially agreed, not to let the matriarch know, for fear that she would worry too much and aggravate her illness. Okay. However, the matriarch, who is of elegant virtues, has long understood that the disciples were very worried and cannot withstand the questioning of the matriarch. But anyways, so the predecessors, they ended up still telling her about this. And then so the deep, profound eyes of the matriarch, they burst into tears. After a long silence, the matriarch sighed and said, I know, I can only beseech or implore, plead with Lamu for mercy. Okay. So that night, the land of the autumn turning into winter was solemn and desolate. An incense bowl, that's the, when we have in the temple, at the altar, we have the 3 lamps, and then in the center, there's also that incense, we call it incense urn or incense bowl where we burn the incense, okay? An incense bowl of sandalwood incense was lit in the clean and tidy temple. In front of the altar was kneeling an old saint with white hair who was ill. Her aged countenance reflected a firm and determined will. Her holy face shone like the moon under the light of the Buddha lamps. In order to withstand the calamity of sentient beings, wishing to burn out the last bit of light, her moist eyes are filled with tears that will not fall. And she silently prayed in her heart, I alone will bear the calamity of sentient beings. Matriarch's body is physically petite, but it has the great power of compassion. 1 bow, another bow, 3 bows, 1,000 bows, 2,000 bows. The silent and quiet earth was awakened, and in the gloomy world, a solemn and clear torch illuminating the boundless darkness. Heaven and earth, ghosts and deities, all must have been moved to tears as a frail woman shoulders the boundless karma of sentient beings. 8,000 bows, 9,000 bows. Every bow like the sound of pounding, I don't know, this pounding jade, I don't know. Okay, so I guess there was a voice from God or from heaven says, this is the collective karma of all beings, and all beings must bear it together. But she prayed silently, I am also a sentient being. I will bear it. Heaven remained silent, but the matriarch still bowed resolutely. Time slipped by in the silence of the moment. Not realizing, a faint light projected into the temple where the fragrance endured. The earth awakened, and the sound of cicadas and birds sounded a grateful, musical movement. The matriarch finally heard the message of compassion from the bottom of her heart. She knew that God had granted her plea. After 10,000 bows, matriarch stood up with an ailing back and staggered a bit. She did not feel that her waist was no longer as straight as before, and her step was not as strong as before. She did not know that her spirit is rapidly depleting. All she can think in her mind is, the temple can continue to operate, and there are many people who can board the Dharma boat and reach the shore of enlightenment. Matriarch did not feel the illness of the body and mind, even though they carried an additional heavy burden. The burden of the official order of temple closure was added to her frail body. By the way, the 10,000 bows, it's not easy to do, especially without stopping, okay? Now, normally today, we tend to do bows pretty quickly, but I think the matriarch did it more slowly, and so obviously it takes a lot longer. Now, I admit that I have done 10,000 bows in one sitting, so to speak, but that nearly that was, I don't want to do that again. And it did pretty quickly too, and so but it's definitely, so I can imagine, I know what it must have been like for her to do it. Basically, she was probably doing that all night. Took her probably all night. I mean, when I did the 10,000, it was fast, but it took me over an hour. But, I'm sure, doing it slowly and, imagine I'm younger, I was younger than she was. And so, this is definitely, it's not an easy thing to do. Okay. So, all right. Now there was obviously, the patriarch or the matriarch has like a predecessor or, one or more predecessors who serve her, if you will, or accompany her and kind of, help her with stuff. And so there's this one whose title now is Dehui Bodhisattva. Okay, so that literally means virtue and wisdom. Bodhisattva. Okay, she's a predecessor Zhang. Okay, Zhang Yutai. Okay, so she's in one of the other units within our Fayi group. I think it's under Tian Yuan. Okay, and then so she had served the matriarch, but she was kind of instructed by her example. She learned from, the matriarch. In the process of conducting Tao affairs, she was not very literate and seldom spoke apart from naturally being kind and compassionate to all beings. She often prayed and bowed for sentient beings, often alone in the middle of the night in the temple. This is the basis for her conducting Tao affairs, to ask for heaven's mercy. Her selflessness has accomplished the practice of a bodhisattva, and it allows us to see the continuation of the matriarch's demeanor. Tao is a collaborative effort between heaven and man. When human power is insufficient, we can only sincerely beseech, plead with heaven. Okay. So what happened then? After after the 10,000 bows that night. So the next day, found out that official order for the temple closure was not carried out. Okay. Instead, the authorities sent a commissioner to understand the situation and determined that the temple was not, in fact, a cult. Okay. So the order was rescinded. The predecessors happily reported this to matriarch, and she just smiled. As long as there's no problem, then it's okay. And everyone was kind of amazed. Only the predecessor, so we're talking about this Dehui Bodhisattva, who served by her side, had, tears hanging at the corners of her eyes, because only the predecessor knew that it was not just a miracle, but it was because of matriarch's 10,000 vows that moved heaven and earth, basically, to make that happen. Okay. Okay. The next story, I guess these are okay. So this one, shouldering the karma of all, or bearing the karma of all sentient beings. Okay. Tao is so precious that an ordinary person who received Tao can transform their life and transcend birth and death. Therefore, the karmic debt collectors, that can be somewhat awkward to say sometimes, but so I'm thinking they're actually karmic victims. Okay, they're victims of our past wrongdoing, I guess. So I guess I just came up with that. Karmic victims, you can say that too. But they're karmic debt they're collecting on the karmic debts. Okay, are shaking with anger. Therefore, they use the most powerful means to sully and smear or tarnish the Tao society. Right? We know that in the Tao, in the temple, there's a clear distinction, right? We make a clear distinction from male and females, right? So, so they I guess start spreading rumors or whatever of saying that, in this Tao temple, they're calling it, they start calling it this naked worship, where people strip down and then, and they do their worship or whatever. And, part of the thing is that because when we do the Tao ceremony, outside people cannot, it's not public, it's not open. Okay. So it's only those people who've received the Tao or are participating in receiving the Tao, they can be there. And so, obviously to outsiders, they're wondering what's going on inside. Okay. So, they also gave Yiguan Dao, this label of, it's called in Chinese, it's the, Yadan Jiao. It's a duck egg sect. Okay. So it's basically, it's kind of like saying that it's some kind of a cult. Okay. Remember, this is in Taiwan. And so some people today actually, maybe the young people today may not have heard of these things. But some who've been around, who are older, will have heard about these. Okay, so Daokin can only cultivate and practice Dao secretly, and the vegetarians have to deal with overwhelming resistance from society and within their own families. Right? In addition, those who have not yet received Dao regard this Yiguan Dao more as an evil practice and heresy. So that, so this becomes, this is something, it's like destroying the reputation of the Dao temple and community. And so obviously this is a big trial, of the Dao, at that time. During these trying times, virtuous worthies they were arrested, they were locked up, they were tortured. Okay, so this includes, our predecessor of the Fa Yi Tong Yi unit. Okay, so that's our unit, which is predecessor Liu, or he's now the true sage of great virtue. Okay, so he, as far as I know, he was the only one who was tortured. I mean, there were other predecessors who were kind of put in jail as well, but because he, this is another story, but, he wouldn't reveal, again, there's this, the police want to know what that secret is, right? The three treasures is a secret. And so they, I don't know, for some reason they picked on him, but he wouldn't reveal the three treasures. And so they beat him, they did all sorts of things, pepper, water, poured it into his nostrils, hung him upside down, all that stuff. And so later on, he got, I don't know if he got some pneumonia or some lung, illness, disease as a result of his being tortured in jail. Okay. So obviously all these predecessors, they are very, they're all like bodhisattvas. They're willing to suffer for this cause, if you will, this mission to save sentient beings. Okay. All right. So the Tao community went virtually hidden and scattered. The matriarch shed tears every day, or day after day, but heaven was silent. Does the Tao lineage really stop here? Thinking to herself, says, 1, it's better for one person to shoulder the obstacles of these wrongs. So matriarch called a meeting of the predecessors and ordered an open, a repentance class. Okay, so this repentance class, in all the years that we were here at this temple here, we've only had, I think, one repentance class. Okay, and at another temple earlier we had, I think there was another one, but these are rare because they really require, and back then they had the matriarch, or when they were in China, the matriarch and maybe the patriarch. Today, there aren't, a predecessor would be able to preside over a repentance class, because basically there had to be someone of such great virtue that they can offset or take on the karmic burdens, part of the karmic burdens of the people attending the class. Okay, so in this case, where matriarch is, I don't know if obviously she did not preside over these classes themselves because she remained in seclusion. Okay, but she had to authorize basically the classes. So the predecessors, would ask the matriarch, if they can hold a repentance class, and the matriarch would say, let them hold the class. But in doing so, the matriarch basically is still taking responsibility for all these classes. Okay. So what she said was, for Daokin participating in the class, their sinful karma is reduced by 70%. And for the remaining 30%, each person must cultivate, perform merits, and fulfill their vows. So basically what matriarch is saying is that she will take on 70% of all the class members' karmic debts or karmic burdens. Okay. Right. So the author of this piece says, how can 70% of one's karma be eliminated? Is it really as easy as repenting to get 70%, get rid of 70% of one's karma? At that time, each repentance class must get approval from the matriarch, and then so when they held some of these classes already, word from the amazed people who attended these repentance class started spreading. Some people heard the roar of grievances from spirits. Some people saw the grieved spirits, and some even saw their dead relatives. Every Daokin who came out of the repentance class felt a sense of relief, and the body felt a lot lighter, almost like being reborn. Okay, so it really did have an effect in reducing their karma, the karmic debts. Okay. However, these heavy burdens will not disappear into thin air, but rather are transferred to the heavy shoulders of the matriarch. More than 10,000, at least thousands, and he mentioned maybe beyond 10,000 Daokin attended the repentance classes. Okay, so 70% of their karmic burdens fell on matriarch's frail shoulders, causing her to suffer from illness the rest of her life. All right, so some people who had deviated from Holy Teacher and the Tao even ridiculed how the matriarch became sick like this and did not dare to meet people. But those people did not know why the matriarch became sick and who she had done it for. Right? Taiwan's Tao communities were founded by the class members of these repentance classes by enduring hardships as pioneers, hard work, and the matriarch's tears of blood. Okay. So, this is, it's truly, a bodhisattva, or, who can do this, take on all those thousands of people's karmic burdens on themselves. And, a normal person would not be able to do that, but because of her, you can say her virtues, and obviously merits together, she's able to do it. But of course, it was still taking a toll on her body. Okay. When the trials and tribulations gradually let up, the predecessors reported to matriarch, there are many Daokin who want to meet the matriarch, and to have her please give them some words of encouragement. The matriarch said, if I meet the Daokin like this, each one who sees me will retreat from the Tao, right? Because, after all, she's looking very sick, weak, in her condition, the people who see that, they'll wonder, why is it that a matriarch, is in such a condition? Okay. And so that could, it might, be kind of disheartening or demoralizing to them. Okay. So, the matriarch has already suffered a stroke, right? Looking haggard and malnourished, living the simplest of lives in seclusion all these years, except for the predecessors and seniors who accompanied her to pray and bow every day and shedding tears for all sentient beings. Like a mother who wants nothing, children only see the mother's aging, but they rarely think about who the mother is aging for. Okay. As the Vimalakirti Sutra says, a bodhisattva lives and dies for all sentient beings. But where there is life, there is illness. If sentient beings do not have illnesses, then the bodhisattva will not become ill. A bodhisattva who is ill is because of great compassion. All right, so the matriarch is just such a bodhisattva who is ill because of her great compassion and because sentient beings have ills. Okay. So, all right. Okay, so there's another story that about a piece of watermelon. Okay, so during the time when Matriarch was living in seclusion and confined to her place, right, she wouldn't go out, no matter what the season. She was always stayed in the house. So one summer, the weather seemed to be hotter than usual. The hot sun was burning the earth like fire. That day was the hottest day of that summer. There was not a cloud in the sky. In the hot weather, even sitting inside the house, one would sweat like rain. Okay. So Matriarch wiped the sweat off her forehead and asked the predecessor who was present, which is probably that Dehui Busa. How much is a slice of watermelon out there now? The considerate predecessor was well aware of Matriarch's frugality, so at the time, the actual cost of a slice of watermelon was $1. But she deliberately said, "Oh, a slice of watermelon, it's only 50 cents. The matriarch frowned slightly. 50 cents? I'm better off just drinking water. It's all sentient beings' money." Okay. So the predecessor anxiously cried. Matriarch had been to Taiwan for many years. She had been frugal every day and rarely tasted any watermelon. So she rushed to the front and said, "Matriarch, I will pay for it, and it is not sentient beings' money." But the matriarch laughed. "Silly disciple, your money is the sentient beings' money. Better to give me a cup of water." So every time the predecessor told this story, right, she would burst into tears. In the hot summer days, without electric fans and air conditioning, only a slice of cold watermelon could cool one's mouth. How much she hoped the matriarch could eat this watermelon. Today's clergymen are all extremely luxurious. However, the matriarch of this heavenly Tao of the White Era, reluctant to spend the 50 cents of sentient beings' money. She gives us the way back to heaven and suffers for us. Yet she is not willing to eat a slice of watermelon. In her heart, all the money is the sentient beings' money, and the money of all sentient beings can be used only for Tao affairs and faring people, while she is frugal towards herself. Throughout Matriarch's whole life, she preached and worked hard, spreading the Tao in her early years. She drifted from place to place during the war. In her old age in Taiwan, she was confined to bear all the calamities. In her whole life, there was not a day she was not suffering for all sentient beings. Like a mother, her summer sickness and gray hair are caused by us. She has endless tears, even more so because of our ignorance. How can such kindness and virtue be returned by a slice of watermelon? In the early years, when propagating in mainland China, Patriarch and Matriarch not only had no car, but also had to propagate Tao on foot. They walked from village to village. Actually, I wanted to also mention that the matriarch has bound feet. This was an old Chinese tradition, which is it's not a good. I mean, from today's standards, definitely not a good tradition. It's a bad tradition, and they don't do that today, of course. But they bind the feet of young girls. And so that they have like these dainty little feet when they grow up. But it's very painful. And you can go online, you can go look for what this is, and you can see pictures of what happens to their feet. Okay, so it's not good. And so to walk around with that kind of those feet, with bound feet, it's not very easy. So again, this is yet another hardship that Matriarch had to put up with. So walking from village to village, when they arrived at a village, they would always eat a steamed bun, that they brought with them to satisfy their hunger, and then went into the village to propagate Tao after the mealtime. For fear that propagating Tao during mealtime would bring inconvenience to sentient beings, to those who, they're bringing Tao to. It is because of their strict example, there is not one predecessor to this day who has not been diligent and thrifty. They have preserved the frugal lifestyle of patriarch and matriarch. Each time when predecessors saw that the dishes were too sumptuous at the temple, they cannot help but to criticize them. Right? How can disciples of Heavenly Tao forget the frugal family tradition of the 18th patriarch and matriarch? Okay, so, a bowl of porridge and a meal are not easy to come by. The slice of watermelon that matriarch did not eat is a wake-up call in the hearts of many disciples. And how many of our blessings did we reduce? And how much karmic debt did we increase by wasting food in each meal and drink? So this is something, definitely we need to consider. We definitely do, sometimes we have too much food and everything, and we tend to waste as well. And so this is really, they say we're wasting our blessings when we do that. Okay. So because when we are born, our fortune, it includes all these things, is kind of fixed for this life. And so if we use it up too soon, later on, we're going to be in hardship. Okay. So, and plus if we waste, we potentially we become, hungry ghosts in a future life. Okay. So again, this is something that, we need to learn to be more frugal. We should learn from the examples of, the patriarch, matriarchs, and predecessors. Okay. So in this story, in the Lotus Sutra, there is a Sadaprarudita Bodhisattva, which is kind of the long crying, but the Bodhisattva who's always crying. Okay. And then now there's also, this, Bodhisattva is also mentioned in the Mahayana Sutra. Although it's not clear whether, Buddha, when he was talking about them, is talking about the same, Bodhisattva. But they basically, this Bodhisattva weeps day and night when he sees, the sentient beings wandering and suffering from the pain of life and death. So when we see this Sadaprarudita Bodhisattva, we inevitably would think of Matriarch. Or actually, this is the person writing this. Okay, so he would think of that, of the Matriarch. Has Matriarch's whole life not been shedding tears for sentient beings like Sadaprarudita Bodhisattva? Right? So in order to bear the calamities of the trials and tribulations for sentient beings, Matriarch decided to seclude herself from the world. She originally had a healthy body, but now her body suffered from numerous illnesses because she shouldered all the calamities. Although she did not go out, she did not have the enjoyment of the peaceful, quiet life of seclusion. On the contrary, she knew everything that was going on in the temples, always anxious and worried. In her view, the sentient beings are always in the cycle of birth and death, and the only thing that can save the sentient beings is the Dharma boat of the White Era, which also was rocking in the wind and waves. When thinking of sentient beings and disciples, her eager heart was burning like a raging fire, and she could not wait for a moment. Oh, how much she had hoped to rush everywhere to awaken the lost ones. However, she decided to confine herself in order to bear the calamities of the trials and tribulations. How can she be in two places at the same time? She was sorrowful and wept day and night. Her profound, loving, and compassionate eyes are always wet, like the spring water that never dries up. And the tears of her grief and pity for sentient beings never stopped. And because she always cried, her energy was even more consumed. During the more than 20 years of confinement, she did not have a day without illness. In addition to her sorrowful weeping, her body suffered full of illnesses. Even her eyes suffered from an eye disease because of the constant weeping. The life The life of the matriarch was plain and simple. She did not appear to have any superpowers, nor did she have the patriarch's humor and wisdom. She was just like the Sadaparudita Bodhisattva. She was full of loving care like a mother to all sentient beings. Although her life was haunted by illnesses, her love for sentient beings never stopped, and her tears for sentient beings never dried up. Then one night in 1975, the sky and the earth suddenly changed color and was full of thunder and lightning. In the originally cloudless sky appeared dark clouds, rumbling thunder, and the heavy downpour of the rain, like tears, poured straight down onto the earth. A bodhisattva finally closed her teary eyes and departed from the world forever. Heaven and earth were stunned. Even the plants were moved by it. So that was 1975. That's when she returned back to heaven, finally. Although the torch of her life has been extinguished, she has ignited the inextinguishable fire in the world. Her whole life, she has carried the calamities in exchange for the propagation of Tao. The endless heart lamp of the illuminating Tao lineage has ignited from one lamp to 1,000,000 and will continue through generations. Even if the sun and moon falls, her wish to save sentient beings will never change. Now, although the great soul of the matriarch has stopped her toiling in the world, but her infinite compassion and sorrow for sentient beings does not cease. Seeing sentient beings and disciples are still lost, she cannot enjoy the comfort of heaven. She cannot let go of the ties that are bound by the flesh and blood of all sentient beings. Therefore, she has been away for more than 10 years. So this is, so obviously this was written in the 80s, 85 at least, and still constantly running around across the country and the overseas Tao communities conducting scriptures. So through channeling, that's through the channeling. She finally fulfilled her purpose by getting rid of the shackles of the body and was able to go everywhere to awaken the lost ones. Okay, so, because, that's, alright, so I think, let me see. Alright, so that's, I guess, pretty much all we have time for. So the matriarch basically, as you probably can get an idea through some of these stories, snippets of her life, of what kind of person she was. I mean, she really, truly was a bodhisattva in the flesh in this world. Okay. Everything that she did, was what a bodhisattva does. Okay. So totally selfless and willing to take on karmic burdens and suffer in place of the hardships of sentient beings. Okay. So I hope that, you've learned a little bit more about our matriarch, and basically can appreciate, what the suffering that she's been through for us, for all her disciples. And so, we should, be grateful and try to do our best to cultivate, to, maybe be able to repay some of this, the grace, you could say, that, we, got from her. Okay. So, if I had said anything wrong or, not satisfactorily, I asked the Buddhas and saints, for forgiveness, and also from, Yahweh Bodhisattva. And I asked, transmitting masters, and lecturers for their corrections. Thank you.